Hey guys, Dorentio here with another video. NFTs seem to be everywhere. They seem to have invaded every corner of the internet like an avalanche over the past few months. Join the blockchain. Whee! And it seems to be something that has escaped the little pockets of the internet that initially hosted these crypto scams. And if you're familiar with these cryptocurrency schemes, you probably know many of the types of communities that really embraced this kind of thing. Among the core crypto bro crowd that really wanted to promote their own cryptocurrencies for what often was a pump and dump scheme. Like, you all probably know this story, especially if you've talked to me about it before. Someone, whether they're an online guru or someone who owns a Discord server that revolves around an altcoin, tries to artificially inflate their worthless coin by convincing retail investors that they're the early investors. And then, 99% of people that invest their life savings into whatever worthless altcoin that's created loses it, right? Like, I've heard this story a million times. But this seemed to evolve through the introduction of NFTs into something that massive corporations and celebrities seem to bandwagon onto, right? For example, you saw massive game companies like Ubisoft and Square Enix roll out their own crypto grifts, right? They've named this new blockchain-fueled nightmare Play to Earn! Even this image I put up here looks cringy. A lot of companies seem to be so invested in this new scheme that they're willing to pivot the entire direction of their business models to something that is tailored just for something that seems to be a short-term trend at the expense of their existing revenue streams. For example, let's look at Square Enix. They sold several valuable properties, including Tomb Raider, for basically pennies on the dollar. They sold it for a fraction of what it was worth, with the assumption that they can cash in on the NFT gravy train, only to realize that their purchase was worthless, right?
The transaction enables the launch of new businesses by moving forward with investments in fields including blockchain, AI, and the cloud.
And if you've been paying attention, the NFT market has dipped pretty significantly over the past month or so. It's not really much of a surprise that Square Enix lost a lot of value after this transaction. But why in the world are companies dropping everything they're doing just for the sake of this seemingly short-term crypto grift? Like, some companies still have glommed on to NFTs and aren't letting go, despite the massive drop in the market's value. Is it because they're trying to make up for their headstrong sprint into the brick wall of NFTs, indicated by the flatlining of NFT transactions in the past month or so? I'm pretty sure this is indicative by the fact that sales on NFTs have gone down 92% just over around the past month or so. Are companies holding on because they're waiting to dump their worthless tokens and investments onto anyone? Or is this some kind of long-term scheme where you expect some massive return on investment in the future?
Maybe. Maybe not.
The more research I did into NFTs, the more it seems to bleed into other aspects of the whole cryptocurrency space. One concept that you eventually run into is the concept of Web3, hence the title of this video. But what in the world is Web3? Many people have explained the concept of Web3 better than I have, but to put it in a nutshell, you have to understand the concept of Web 1 and Web 2. Web 1 refers to the stage of the internet where sites and applications were often created and maintained by individuals, more so than it is now. The internet was more of an assortment of different websites rather than being platforms in themselves, right? The barrier to entry for having traffic on your website was a lot lower, since the skills needed to have a competitive website was also a lot lower. The state of the internet existed from, I guess, the late 90s to around 2004. And moving on to Web 2, Web 2 is what we have now. It's the current state of the internet. We're, again, referring back to Web 2. People create online spaces inside of platforms rather than creating standalone websites with their social spaces in them. And it's been shown that people who created these platforms made a lot of money off of it, right? These are websites we all use right now. Like YouTube.com, for example. And Web3 is apparently supposed to bring us back to a state of the internet where social spaces are apparently decentralized and democratizing or giving power back to the people. Or at least that is the rhetoric. Some cryptocurrency enthusiasts deny the fact that Web3 has anything to do with NFTs and cryptocurrencies, but by definition, Web3 is entirely dependent on blockchain technology. Direct coverage seems to be overwhelmingly positive when I began the process of making this video. However, I'm a little skeptical of Web3 advocates, since many of them seem to have a financial interest in Web3 becoming something that is adopted en masse, especially here on YouTube.com. For example, I think it's pretty obvious that you're going to want Web3 becoming a thing if your username has coin in it and your entire channel revolves around cryptocurrencies. Just saying. It's advertised as democratizing the internet. However, the main issue I have with Web3 is how applications are owned and operated. Business Insider gets this wrong by saying, in Web3, apps will be run by decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs. This means that instead of centralized administration that makes all the decisions are made by users who possess governance tokens, which can be obtained by participating in these decentralized apps, upkeep, or by purchasing them. I guess someone's first impression reading this would be that DAOs are actually a way to flatten hierarchies online, but a little more research on how these tokens are mainly acquired kinda highlights how undemocratic a DAO is, right? For example, this article on PC Mag describes getting these tokens as something that you buy, right? And decision making is described as being a collective vote by the stakeholders, right? So in other words, the more money you put into a DAO, the more decision making power a person has on a given app. And like voting with your wallet doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as being democratic, right? It doesn't really matter if you can afford to buy one token if the guy next to you can buy 1,000, right? The people that can afford to buy more tokens are going to be making all the decisions on the app. And if you actually think about it, how is this any different than how a corporation operates? You buy X amount of shares and that determines how much say you have in it. So, I mean, apparently DAOs are a good thing because, you get to turn every site into a corporation. Isn't that wonderful? Something to put this into perspective is that 97% of Bitcoins are held by 4% of addresses. Just imagine if all applications were run that way. If 4% of people made 97% of the decisions, I wouldn't call that democratic. In fact, if you want to know how it is like owning a share in a DAO, you can do it right now without even creating one. Go make an account on Robinhood or Merrill or whatever other stockbroker you feel like using, and buy however many shares of Facebook that you want. Wait for the shareholders meeting and cast your votes. And what do you know? Your ability to vote doesn't really meaningfully do anything useful. If the guy next to you owns the majority of the shares, your vote won't really matter. In fact, with Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg owns 55% of Facebook's shares, so, having a say in Facebook is beyond most people's price ranges. And, same principle applies to DAOs. The more tokens you can buy, the more control you have over a DAO. And I think the core of the reason why I think the idea of a DAO is horrible and it'll turn the internet into a dystopian nightmare is that for a lot of people, the internet is an escape, right? Because financializing an environment where capital is rewarded over everything else usually doesn't turn out well for most people, right? A similar environment might be like a housing market. Everyone's bidding for something essential, right? And the internet would be a dumpster fire if it was a situation where you had to bid for control of social spaces. Like, I talked about how generally having capital gives you an advantage in social spaces, but having that cemented by literally being able to pay money and directly get that access honestly isn't a very pleasant thought. And going back to the beginning of the video, I talked about how companies really wanted to jump onto this bandwagon to begin with, right? Maybe they wanted to buy all potential prominent social spaces before they became too expensive to buy, right? Anyways, let's just hope Web3 doesn't become something that's adopted en masse.